Hi, Jenni here, and throughout my channel I've mentioned books by Palestinian authors about Palestine in several different videos, but I've never made a dedicated video on Palestinian books and Palestinian authors, so that's what this is. And I'll try to bring up 4 books that I have not talked about on this channel. One of them is a fiction book that I recently read, and 3 of them are non-fiction. It has been 6 months of genocide in Gaza, and it's absolutely soul-wrenching. We need to keep doing everything we can to pressure politicians to boycott, to end the genocide and end the occupation. So the first book that I want to talk about is The Parisian by Isabella Hammad. It took me 2 weeks to read this book that is over 500 pages. So I don't even really know where to begin with this book because so much happened and so many different characters, so many different events, and how perfectly they were woven together. But essentially this story follows Midad, who is studying in Istanbul but moves to France to study in a university there. So he spends 3 years in France and eventually returns to Palestine, to his hometown. And through him, we kind of see so many different historical events, the fall of Ottoman Empire and World War I, the 20s and 30s of Palestine, and all the different ways that Palestinians tried to fight for freedom under the British mandate. Here is a summary of the plot with some minimal spoilers. So Midad travels to Montpellier from Istanbul to study medicine. He stays with Dr. Malineux and his daughter Jeanette. Midad enjoys his time there, is living his best life, and really loves spending time with Jeanette especially. But then he finds out that he is essentially being taken advantage of for being Palestinian. So he moves on to Paris to study history. And in Paris he meets Hani Murad and other political intellectuals who are planning on what to do about Palestine. As he returns to Nablus, Palestine, his father tells him that he cannot return to France anymore. Midad doesn't know why, but it is shared in the book. So in Nablus, Midad witnesses the struggle for freedom from the British mandate through uprisings, strikes, demonstrations, discussions with friends. His life is completely different to what he imagined for himself when he went to study medicine in Montpellier. Other notable characters that stood out to me are Midad's grandmother. She essentially helped raise Midad after his mother passed away when Midad was a child. Hani, obviously. Antoine, who is a French scholar and priest in Nablus, who is kind of following the events in Nablus from the sidelines. The story is a character study of Midad, but also a story of the Palestinian people, a Palestinian town, Palestine fighting for freedom. The story of Midad is very loosely based on Isabella Hammad's great-grandfather, Midad, named as well. Yes, Midad is the focus of the story and the main character, but the story eloquently presents different perspectives of different characters and how different characters experience different historical events. It is a great book that really makes you think. There were so many times where I would finish up reading a couple of chapters and then go on to tell you all what I read and what I thought of it. I will try to keep this spoiler free, but the language is so beautiful. The writing is very excellent. At times I could see okay, this author knows that they are such a good writer. It was very evident in the story at times, but it is very well written. It keeps you hooked. Usually when I read a book, I feel some type of attachment to certain characters. However, this time I didn't feel like a specific attachment to any character, but rather on the story itself. I just think it was very masterfully written and put together. Yes, so I felt deeply fascinated and intrigued by this story. I also learned a lot of new details about historical events that I had read about before, but not the full details. Editor Jenni here. I wanted to add a few of my thoughts on the ending of the book. I thought the story was incredible. This is an epic. It is a really good book. However, I felt the ending was a bit lackluster. It wasn't really fitting for that epic of a story that it is. I felt like it didn't tie up the story as well as it could be. But nevertheless, I thought the book was excellent. Highly recommend this, but I also suggest taking your time with this. As I said, it took me 2 weeks to read this book, and I'm really glad that I took my time with it because I could really delve into the world of the book. Next up, I want to talk about Justice for Some by Noura Erakat. The book was released in 2019. Noura Erakat is a human rights attorney and a professor. I read this book a couple of years ago, and it kind of looks into the question of Palestine from the perspective of law, especially international law, and how so far international law has kind of failed Palestinians, but how it could be used as a way to freedom. The academic book goes through Palestinian history from British Mandate to most recent as of the book's release, so 2019, and again from the perspective of law. I think the book is very interesting, and I really recommend listening to or watching interviews from Noura Erakat before you read the book, so you are familiarized with her voice and the way she presents information and argues her perspective. I think what I learned most from the book was the whole Oslo peace process that took place in the 90s. I knew like the basics of what happened, but not all of the background information. I think Noura Erakat presented them really clearly, and it was easy to grasp, even though at times, of course, used legal jargon. It is an academic book, and for me, legal jargon, I am not too familiar with it, but it wasn't too hard to understand, even if you weren't familiar with the vocabulary. And while the book was released in 2019, I feel like it is very timely now, especially, the genocide unfolding in Gaza, and the international law hasn't done much to stop it. That perspective of international law when it comes to Palestine is very important to look at and critique. So yes, I definitely recommend reading Noura Erakat's book. Next up, I want to suggest They Call Me a Lioness by Ahed Tamimi and Dena Takruri. Ahed Tamimi is a Palestinian activist from Nabi Saleh, a town in the West Bank. And then Dena Takruri is a journalist who is especially known for her series Direct From with Dena Takruri on HA+. In the memoir, Ahed Tamimi recounts growing up in Nabi Saleh under occupation, how she has seen her family members and friends brutalized, even killed, shot at, hurt by the Israeli military. She shares about her will to study different non-violent demonstrations that they have held in Nabi Saleh, and just how it feels as a kid to go through that, living under occupation. When Ahed was 16 years old, she was filmed slapping an Israeli soldier who was in her house's front yard, and she was arrested and eventually had to serve 8 months in prison, underage. She was 16 years old at the time that this took place. So the book also goes through how she felt in the interrogations and in prison, and very much looks into how differently Palestinians are treated in the military court. But while it is really heavy and it is hard to read at times, it is important and crucial to learn what it's like for Palestinian children under occupation. And throughout the story, there is this hope for a freedom, hope for a just future where everyone can be equal. So This one I definitely recommend. Next up, I recommend if you are specifically a history nerd. It's Noura Masalha's Palestine, a 4,000-year history. It's been a couple of years since I read this book, so my memory is a little bit hazy. But as someone who really loves to learn about history from all over the world, I really thoroughly enjoyed this book. This book goes through the history of Palestine and the area of Palestine from the Bronze Age to modern era. I think the summary of the book does a way better explaining of what the book is about instead of me. So, drawing on a rich body of sources and the latest archaeological evidence, Masalha shows how Palestine's multicultural past has been distorted and mythologized by biblical lore and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In the process, Masalha reveals that the concept of Palestine, contrary to accepted belief, is not a modern invention or one constructed in opposition to Israel, but rooted firmly in the ancient past. So yes, this book also really looks into the fact that modern nation states, they are very new. They are a new invention. And when it comes to the region, there is so much more than just nation states. So yes, this book talks about the area of Palestine under different powers and different eras in history. It starts from Bronze Age, it goes through Roman Empire and Palestine during that time, goes through Arab Christian Palestine, and also Palestine in 1800s. What was new to me in this book was, of course, a lot, but I specifically remember reading about how Gaza was kind of the center of literature and learning in Palestine in the 5th and 6th century. A lot of authors lived there, famous scholars lived there. Like, before this book, I would have not known that. So, yes, it is a book that will take a long time to read, but it's absolutely worth it. And if you are hesitant about whether or not you could read through this book, I get it, but I definitely think that what you learn from here is so powerful and something completely new and really important in today's day and age. Those were my 4 suggestions on books about Palestine. Let me know your suggestions in the comments below. Keep supporting Care for Gaza. You can find them on Twitter at Care for Gaza. I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope I see you in the next one. Bye!